apa sih pop up chat. Yang di sini kita ganti ke ini, terus yang ini juga YouTube chat ini. Oke, sudah. Karena saya langsung muncul lagi loh. Hai. Kamu kalau nggak mau, maksudnya kalau punya kegiatan lain, mendingan jangan ngeliatin aku karena aku kemungkinan tidak apa ya, tidak bakal banyak ngomong sih. Bener-bener pengen fokus belajar. Cuman ya nggak tahu, siapa tahu live stream study session bisa berguna. Iya, buat yang baru datang, tadi aku kan udah live stream, sebenarnya udah live stream tadi jam 7-an ya. Terus sempat main bentar, abis main aku mikir mau malam ini mau belajar mungkin sampai lebih malam lagi, tapi ya aku bilang karena ini sebenarnya bisa dikonsider sebagai pembajakan, jadi aku kepikirannya, hai Vanessa, halo. Ya, karena ini mungkin bisa dikonsider sebagai pembajakan, jadi aku mikirnya mau end yang tadi, terus aku start di sini supaya ya mungkin sekalian aja semua yang ada di stream hari ini, maksudnya di stream yang ini nggak usah di upload ulang gitu rekamannya gitu. Tapi yang tadi kan sambil main-main harusnya oke lah ya. Cuman ya kalau yang tadi sebenarnya tadi sempat kebuka sedikit sih, jadi takutnya kalau seandainya kalau nggak bisa diedit di YouTube-nya, ya udah itu juga nggak akan diupload sih. Cuman nggak apa-apa lah, temani aku belajar ya gengs. Tapi kalau kalian mau pergi juga tidak apa-apa, feel free buat keluar masuk. Malam ini ayo kita vibing, chilling sambil nonton video ini. Terima kasih. Ayo kita belajar. Tata. Suruh musikku kecilin sedikit. Terus kita dengerin yang ini aja.
So in this section, I want to play with the adjustments.
BTW, ini aku apa sih namanya? Jadi ini videonya aku beli di Udemy gitu ya. Jadi aku nonton kayak gitu banyak. Dan apa sih namanya? Aku udah nonton sampai section 4. Jadi kalau seandainya ada yang baru ngikutin terus mikir, kok tiba-tiba langsung ke sini, kok aku udah punya gambarnya gitu di sini gitu. Kenapa aku gambar dia? Ya, karena aku kemarin-kemarin sudah mencoba pelajarin setengahnya, tapi masih ada beberapa video yang aku belum tonton. Intinya sih kayak gitu sih. Jadi ya sudahlah. Kita nonton saja. Terima kasih. Ya, emang agak ribet sih itu. Mungkin begitu. Thank you. Ayo kita nonton.
So in this section, I want to play with the adjustments. It's that little magic wand in the upper left-hand corner. And in order to do that, why don't we add some backgrounds to these characters? The first things first, I'm going to color this in the same way that I colored in my character before.
Baru sadar. Aku nontonnya kelebihan 1. Iya gak sih? Soalnya dia udah berwarna tapi punyaku belum berwarna. Berarti harusnya ini dong. Ya sih.
Okay, and we're back. We are going to be talking about coloring in our comics, and Procreate has some cool features that are going to make that way easier on us. So first thing I want to do is let's go up to our layers. We want to make sure we're on our ink layer, and you're already familiar with the color drop feature. So let me come in here. Let me maybe grab...
Suaraku sama suara kakaknya fine kan ya? Maksudnya nggak tumpang tindih gitu. Kalian juga ngapain dengar suara kakaknya sih? Ngapain dengar suaraku juga sih? Udah aja begitu. Mungkin suara kakaknya bisa aku kecilin sedikit.
you know, kind of a skin tone type thing in my color palette, and then I could just take it and I could just drag it into my character. Pretty simple. And I could actually go about coloring in my comic just like that by grabbing the color and dragging it in. But I want my colors to be on a separate layer from my inks. So let me undo that and show you what I mean. Let's create a new layer underneath my inks. I'm gonna hit plus, and this is my new layer. I have been being very bad about naming my layers, so let's name this colors, and let's name that other layer, rename inks really quick so I can keep track
Ini kenapa layernya nggak bisa diturunin? Oh ya bisa.
Of these things when I look at my layers. And now, of course, since I am no longer on that color drop layer, if I drag this color onto his face, what's gonna happen? It's gonna fill the whole canvas. Why? Because there are no lines to fill. I am on the wrong layer. But I can do something called a reference layer.
Aku baru sadar aku salah layer kemarin. Ada magic wand nggak sih di sini? Ini otomatis. Terus delete. Tuh, delete manual aja deh. Aku nggak paham. Terus balik lagi ke matiin magic wand. Selection. Oke, jadi kita pakai layer yang color. Terus kata dia apa?
Which will use the inks from one layer on the other layer when you go to color. That may sound confusing, so let me show you how it works. I'm gonna tap on inks. I'm gonna tap on it again, and among all of the options I have over here, one of them is reference. It's near the bottom, so I'm gonna tap on reference, and then under the word ink, it says reference. That means it's a reference layer. So when I go to another layer, that layer will be referencing my reference layer. So now when I drag this color in, boom, that fills in because it's referencing that layer. And as I toggle that layer off, it's not toggling off everything, it's just toggling off my colors layer. So now I can go in and fill in my character. So now I can grab maybe a greenish color for his shirt, something like that, and I drag it, and oh no, what happened? This is all part of my plan, by the way. I know what happened. I'm gonna undo it, because what's happening here is it looks like a closed shape, but that is not a closed shape. So why is this happening? Well, it's because my ink panels are on a different layer than my characters. So sometimes I like to just go down here, tap on the letter N, and adjust the opacity of those ink panels so I can see my colors a little better. And then I'll actually go to my reference layer. I'll grab a black, make sure I'm on that reference layer, and I'll just come in here and I'll close these lines so that they work. And I'm going to close this line, and you won't be able to see it because of the black panels. When I turn everything back on, you're not going to see any of these lines if I do my job right. Also gives me an opportunity with my eraser to come in here and erase some of the...
Oh, nggak mau. I know the problem. Something like this. Bisa. Kayak aku perlu belajar color theory lagi gak sih? Pemilihan warna aku jelek banget. Salah layer lagi. Aduh, kebiasaan deh. Color. Ya, aku benerin ini dulu ya. Oke, bener. Ganti layarnya. Terus kita pilih warna yang tadi.
overlap just to make it look a little bit cleaner. I think I overlapped here with his head a little bit. Yeah, his hand looked good. All right, everything looks good. I think all my shapes are closed. So now, when I go to my colors, I gotta find that green color I was using again. Maybe a light green, something like that. There we go. Now it's filling in. It's filling in on the right layer. Everything's good. So I can just come in here, drag my colors, drop my colors. Let's get his face. There's some little areas that I like to zoom in on when I'm color dropping because they're just too small. For example, his eyes there, his mouth there, get his other eye there. I think this one's the same way. Get that ear,
Susah banget.
eye. Let's get this other eye. This is gonna be hard. Oh, I hit it. And then maybe I'll just grab like a nice shade of blue for the coffee cup. And there we go. Cool. Now let's go up here. Ink pen.
Ininya belum. Blue. Blue yang sedikit lebih gelap. Oke, di sini nice.
Panels, letter N, go back to our opacity, drag that up. The other problem here is that if I zoom in, our ink panels are below our color layer. So I'm going to tap and hold and make sure our panels are at the top layer. And that way they'll obscure anything underneath, keep this nice and clean. So that's great. That is a great way to keep our colors on their own separate layers from their inks. So if I want to change them down the road, or if I make some changes to my inks, it's not going to affect my colors. It's not going to get messy. It just makes life easier. I also want to add some shading to this character. We could do what we did with the strawberries, tap on the layer and create an alpha lock. But like I said before, I want to learn some new stuff. So we're going to do it a little bit differently this time. We are going to be using masks. So to add the shading, I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to rename it shading to make my life easier. There we go. And then I'm going to grab a slightly different shade of brown to use as my shader. And I'm going to make sure my tech pen is really big, or my studio pen. Yep, that's what I'm on, the studio pen. And make sure it's really big. And then I'm going to add in the shading. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Brad, that is going way, way off the character. Like it's bleeding out. I don't like that. I understand. Totally understand. But that's okay. For now, we're just going to roll with it. Who cares if it goes off? Whoops, that's a little too thick. I want to add a shadow under his nose. That's way too thick. Let me grab a smaller brush here.
Wait, aku lost. Ntar. Tadi dia apa sih? Alpha.
I want to add a way this character. We could do what we do with masks. So to add the shading, I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to rename it shading to make my life easier. There we go. And then I'm going to grab a slightly different shade of brown to use as my shader. And I'm going to make sure my tech pen is really big, or my studio pen. Yep, that's what I'm on, the studio pen. And make sure it's really big. And then I'm going to add in the shading. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Brad, that is going way, way off the character. Like it's bleeding out. I don't like that. I understand. Totally understand. But that's okay. For now, we're just going to roll with it. Who cares if it goes off? Whoops, that's a little too thick. I want to add a shadow under his nose. That's way too thick. Let me grab a smaller brush here. Change the size. Get that in there. Maybe get some lines under his eyes like, oh, wow, that's surprising. You know, get a little shading under his nose here. We do the same thing under his chin. I'm probably adding too much shading, but that's all right. Get it on the edge of his ear. And then I'll get this guy too. Boop. Just add a little bit of shading, a little bit of shading. There we go. That looks good. Now what about this excess over here that kind of fell off the edge of the character? If I had used alpha lock like I did on the strawberry, obviously that wouldn't have escaped the paint layer, but since I've added the shading to its own separate layer so I could modify it if I need to. Now if I had used alpha lock like I did on the strawberry, none of that paint would have escaped, but I wanted to use my shading on a different layer than my colors, again, so if I wanted to change something up in the future, I have that ability. So instead, I'm going to do something called a mask. And what this does is think of a mask like masking tape. What does masking tape do in real life, or painter's tape? Well, before you paint a room, you put tape around the edges you don't want paint on, like a door frame or something like that. That masks out that area, so as you paint, no paint gets underneath that tape, keeping a nice clean line. This works the same way. There's two types of masks in Procreate. The first one is a mask, which you can see it kind of joins with the layer below it, and it's all white. So wherever there is white, paint will show up. Wherever there is black, paint will not. So if I start drawing with black, this paint will disappear. And I'll open that up and you can see what the layer mask looks like. And as I draw more paint, I open that up, you can see there's more paint. So that's how that works. Think of that layer mask as masking tape that you're going to be using while you're painting a room, not wanting any paint to get on a door or a window frame. So that's one kind of layer. It's a layer mask. Can I just delete just the layer mask but keep the shading? I sure can. But then there's another kind of mask, a clipping mask. And that's the kind I'm going to use here. So I'm going to tap on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to put a little arrow on it, and this will clip to the layer below it. Now, I know this sounds a little bit confusing. I'm using a lot of words, clipping and masking.
Sama kayak di Photoshop ya?
Here's what you need to know. A clipping mask is only going to show paint on top of where there already is paint on the layer below it. That still may sound confusing, so let's turn it on and show you what I'm talking about. Gonna tap on clipping mask, and you see what happened to that layer? There's a little arrow on the left-hand side that's pointing down and says, I am clipped to the colors layer. And what you see on our actual drawing here is all that excess paint, it disappeared. Now, technically, it's still on that layer. We can't see it because it is only showing paint where there is paint on the layer below it. So if you're following along, what I want you to do is on a separate layer, I want you to add your shadows, and I want you to make sure that's above your color layer, and then I want you to go there and turn it into a clipping mask, and you'll see what happens. Masking is one of those things that's kind of hard to describe, and I know some people have a hard time kind of wrapping their head around it, and so my advice is play with it, try it out. Sometimes you have to use it before you start to understand what it's good at. So I'm going to add some highlights next. So I'm going to tap and hold on this character's skin, and I'm going to add a highlight. I'm going to make sure I'm on my shading layer. And I'm just going to come along the top. Oops, I need a much bigger brush. I keep doing that. Big brush. And we're going to add a highlight along the top of his head in each of these frames. Maybe on the top of his ear. Do the same thing in this last frame. Very nice. I'm going to do the same thing on his shirt. I'm going to add a shadow by grabbing that color green by tapping and holding to sample it. And I'm going to drag down to get a darker shade. I'm going to get a much darker shade. Maybe we add a shadow under his head.
Kenapa aku naruh lightingnya ngawur banget sih? Nggak continuity. Panel yang kiri lightingnya dari mana? Panel yang ini lightingnya dari mana?
Maybe a little bit of a shadow like that. This is going to be a big shadow, and maybe just a little shadow there. And also a green highlight. So tap and hold to sample that green color again. Come in here, add a really light shade of green. Come in here, add a highlight there, definitely get a highlight on the edge of him there. Maybe I'll even grab a little bit of that light brown again and get a highlight on the top of his nose in that middle frame. Maybe even on that second frame, that'd look good. Anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in details. I have fun drawing. It's a good distraction for me. So the reason I put these highlights and shadows on their own layer is sometimes I make them too dark, and that allows me, if they're on their own layer, to tap on the letter N and go ahead and change the opacity. So if I change it to 50%, I can say, oh yeah, that's how I want it to look. That looks good to me. If I had used the alpha lock instead of the mask, it'd be much harder to do that. I'd have to go in there and manually repaint it. But by keeping things on their own layers, it's much easier to go back in and modify like that.
Oke. Oh, jadi begitu cara mewarnai di Procreate. Interesting, menarik. pertama ini harusnya kita coba di, aku tadi mikir mau kasih highlight sedikit di sini. Hidung kayak babi hidung. Terus kita kasih highlight warna ini di punggung. Kok nggak bisa gambar? Ini masih ada yang nontonin aku? Nggak usah ditonton, nggak apa-apa. What the fun with nontonin orang yang lagi belajar? Kan kayaknya di ini, di bagian colors. Ada, it's fine. Jadi background musik. Oke. Gimana kalian menjadikan aku background musik, tapi kan apa ya, maksudnya kakak yang ngejelasin aku itu kan ngomong gitu loh. Kalian bisa fokus melakukan apa yang kalian lakukan dengan aku apa? Dengan mendengarkan suaraku seperti ini. Biar gak sepi. Terima kasih loh. Heeh. Aneh banget sih gambar. Oh iya, lupa kan bisa di zoom. Apa kamu zoom aja. Jadi kalau di Procreate cara pick color tuh gini, kita hold pakai tap jari, diarahin, sedih bisa mewarnain kayak gitu. Terus kayak gini, kita hold pakai jari di sini. Aku mau warnain ini dulu sampai kelar, baru aku nonton ke video selanjutnya. Kalian kalau ngewarnain lebih suka satu layer atau mode banyak layer kayak gini? Digabungin jadi satu. Aku sampai sekarang masih belum menemukan cara ngewarnain yang baik dan benar. Pada suara. Terus ini balik ke setting layer. Benar di sini. Banyak layer. Oke. Karena kalau banyak layer tuh kemungkinan salah layernya lebih sering gitu loh. Jadi kayak males nyebelin. Menyedihkan banget sih. Soalnya kalau mau ganti warna tinggal lock aja yang udah diwarnain. Iya juga ya. Terus udah dibiasain. Rencanaku sih kalau aku udah lancar Procreate, aku mau mulai sering apa sih namanya, posting lagi di IG. Misalnya kan aku punya IG yang supposedly harusnya aku post gambar atau karya di situ kan, tapi kayak ya karena nggak ada skillnya, sebenarnya cuma nyari-nyari alasan doang sih. Cuman kayak aku kayak pengen kayak lakuin kayak art prom gitu loh, kayak tiap hari ngegambar, ada tantangannya, hari ini gambar apa, besok gambar apa gitu. How I do that? Tadi kok warnanya tiba-tiba berubah? Heh, nggak paham. Susah. Atau enggak ingat rename layer. Tapi ada juga yang suka satu layer terus ditimpa-timpa terus kalau nggak suka sama warna sebelumnya. Aku pernah coba gambar kayak gitu dan itu menyenangkan sih. Maksudnya kayak apa namanya? Karena kita nggak usah nih kayak ini aku sekarang. Ini di bagian color terset, nggak perlu ganti-ganti gitu loh, dan pick color habis kita pick kita bisa langsung timpa aja gitu, nggak harus ini pick dulu dari sini terus diganti layernya baru bikin di situ gitu ya, plus minus ya. hmm Udah lah ya, oke lah ya. Layer shadow nya mana? Oh, dulu waktu pertama kali belajar aku malah layer shadow sama lighting itu aku pisahin. Why I have titik di sini, ini dari mana? Panel ink, oh dari iya, kalau layernya banyak tiba-tiba di titik yang nggak sengaja kepencet bingung. Masalahnya tuh kalau procreate itu ya kayak kita mau zoom sama itu kan pakai jari, tapi kadang-kadang pakai jari itu juga bisa kepencet gitu loh. Tuh, ini aku pakai jari, jadi kayak kadang-kadang muncul titik-titik tanpa tanpa tahu gitu loh. Kalau banyak layer kan efeknya sih begitu. hmm, Ngomong tuh buka ini bentar ya. Kemarin tuh aku lihat di Instagram, aku follow ada apa gambar kucing. Nah ini kakak yang ini, dia gambarnya bagus banget, ini pakai Procreate kan, kayak bisa bisa begini gitu ya, bukan itu. Nah ini tuh kayak itu satu layer loh, jadi kayak langsung ditimpa-timpa begitu aja, itu kayak eh how could you do that gitu, kayak keren banget gitu. Ini juga digambarin, aku nggak tahu ini gara-gara Procreate emang karena kakaknya jago aja. Gue kayak kenapa she make it so easy gitu loh. I don't know. Pelan-pelan belajar. Iya, maunya sih begitu. Hmm, oke. Ya, pokoknya begitu. Keren kan? Lah dulu matkul drawing juga satu layer, mau pakai kertas sama pensil. Ya nggak salah sih. Itu satu layer namanya. Oke, ayo kita lanjut belajar ya. Tut, tut, tut. Hmm, next video. Coloring. Apa judulnya?
I'm gonna go up to ink panels. I'm gonna tap on it. So in this
Coloring the comic. Bukannya dari awal udah diwarnain. Ayo kita nonton.
section, I want to play with the adjustments. It's that little magic wand in the upper left-hand corner. And in order to do that, why don't we add some backgrounds to these characters? The first things first, I'm going to color this in the same way that I colored in my character before. I'm going to go up to ink panels, I'm going to tap on it, and I'm going to turn it into a reference layer, which again means that anywhere that I draw paint or add paint, it's going to reference that layer. I want this background color to actually go all the way at the bottom of my layer, so that's where I'm going to add that new layer. Tap on it, rename it back background. There we go. And now I'm gonna pick a nice shade of maybe a lighter blue, and I'll just drag it in, and because it's referencing that panel layer, it fills it in really nicely. Actually, I want a slightly lighter shade of blue. I'm really picky. That's too bright. There we go. I'm a professional artist. That's the color I wanted. All right, fill these in.
Sama. Yang panelnya di reference dulu. Oke. Hilang. Ya, sama. Taruh di sini, ke sini. Nice. Tapi kalau begini harusnya reference tuh cuma bisa satu. Jadi begitu aku pakai yang ink reference, ink panel, yang layer yang ini nggak ke reference lagi gitu. Menarik.
Then fill those in. So just color dropped those three, added some nice color, and this comic is already looking like a finished comic, but I want to add some just basic backgrounds. So first of all, this very first panel here, he's chilling, it's calm, maybe he's in a kitchen. So I'm gonna come in here with a slightly darker shade of blue, and I'm still using my studio pen for this, and maybe I draw in a countertop behind him. And it's just a subtle thing that you can't, just basic backgrounds. So first of all, this very first panel here, really nicely. Actually, I want a slightly lighter shade of blue. I'm really picky. That's too bright. There we go. I'm a professional artist. That's the color I wanted. All right, fill these in, fill those in. So just color dropped those three, added some nice color, and this comic is already looking like a finished comic, but I want to add some just basic backgrounds. So first of all, this very first panel here, he's chilling, it's calm, maybe he's in a kitchen. So I'm gonna come in here with a slightly darker shade of blue, and I'm still using my studio pen for this, and maybe I draw in a countertop behind him, and it's just a subtle thing that you can't really, you're not really paying attention to it. That's why I'm using just a slightly different shade of blue. Maybe there's something on that countertop, like maybe there's a coffee machine. I gotta use a smaller pen for this. And you could see like that little coffee pot sitting there. Fill that in. Maybe there's a top to the coffee pot, something like that. Place for the filter, stuff like that. Maybe there's some more mugs sitting over here on the side that you can see in the background. Nothing too complicated. Maybe I draw some cabinets as well, something like this. I'll just draw some basic lines. And the nice thing about using just a color like this is it's not meant to stand out. I'll add some handles to those cabinets too. It's just meant to provide you with an idea of what is in the background. Maybe this is a door, kind of just draw in a door, very basic stuff. Maybe even behind his head, I'll draw in a...
Kayaknya ini karakternya harus koinin juga deh. Hilang. Sorry. Freehand. Tapi gimana cara mindahin dia bareng-bareng ya? Bisa nggak sih di select bareng? Select. Gimana sih caranya? Oh, nggak tahu cara biar milih rame-rame. Kayaknya di video yang sebelumnya sempat ngasih tahu deh. Maksudnya aku tuh sebenarnya pengen apa? Ini kan masuk select, ini kan. Sorry. Wah, membingungkan. Nggak ngerti, mau mindahin aja repot. Oh, pakai ini. Nah, ini kan cuman bawa intinya doang kan. Kayak pengen mindahin sama satu rame-rame gitu loh. Select kamera B. Terus ini ya udahlah, nggak usah bingung.
A little bit of a clock or something like that. Be very careful with that.
Oh, aku tahu, biar nggak kerasa aneh, kasih kaki aja. Ya udahlah, nggak itu kaki lah.
Out there. It's pretty early in the morning, so let's do like 8 a.m., something like that. So there we go. When we zoom out, we have a background, but that background doesn't really distract from the foreground. In this next panel, he's pretty surprised. And so now I want some surprised lines coming out of him. So I'm actually going to toggle the character off so I can see a little bit better. And I'm going to create a new layer above my background to do this because I'm going to be adjusting it a little bit. But for this, I'm going to be drawing lines and I'm going to let them snap into lines like that. Do this. You're going to see why in a second. Basically, this is just like focus lines that are pulling you into the center, but his head will be covering most of it. Do something like that. Do something like that. Just keep drawing. Tap and hold. Tap and hold. Tap and hold. There we go. I like the panels. I'm going to toggle off the panels too, and I'm gonna close these lines in just by drawing little edges here because we're gonna drop some paint in there to fill those shapes in. And to do that, I'm gonna make sure that all of my other reference layers are off because I was playing with reference layers. I do want to paint on layer 7 this time, so I'm gonna drag my layers in here just like so. So the idea is, if you've ever seen like a Spider-Man comics, used to do this all the time, where there'd be this like surprise, like, oh, and the inside lines would all be pointing to that center point. I might even add, you know, a couple extra lines now that I can see it, what's happening here. Some thinner lines. Add another one here. Tap and hold. I should have turned down my tap and hold so that the part goes a little faster, but that's all right. You get the idea. There we go. So let's go to our adjustments up here.
Okay. I think like this. Kalau di procreate, di klik hold itu bisa buat garis lurus. Hold, nah begitu. Something like this, I think. Ini sebut lagi di sini. Nah, begini. Terus ini di hide dulu. Reference edit off, di hide juga. Sekarang kita RBG dikasih garis. Kalian sudah pada makan? Jangan lupa makan, nanti sakit. Kata aku yang malas makan. Yeay. Oh, aku notice kayaknya kalau ini aku hold terus aku geser, dia berubah something, tapi aku nggak tahu berubahnya berdasarkan apa ya. Kayak membingungkan sekali. Susah banget. Klik alt. Kenapa dia ganti-ganti warna terus sih? Oh ya, kayaknya aku terlalu lama deh nahan. Kalau kalian tidak ngeliat gerakan tanganku pasti bingung ngapain sih dari tadi. Karena aku berusaha mengklik itu dia malah berubah warna. Hmm. Hmm. Di YouTube itu ada tulisannya concurrent viewer. Itu artinya orang yang lagi nonton aku sekarang apa gimana ya? Tapi tadi itu ada tulisannya 0. Tapi ada orang ya gitu. Terus pas aku ngobrol kayak gini tiba-tiba ada yang ngechat gitu. Kayak nanya, "Oh, udah nggak ada yang nonton ya?" Tapi tiba-tiba ada yang ngechat terus kayak, "Lah, tulisannya 0 tapi kukira concurrent view yang ada di sini artinya ini apa? Yang nonton berapa orang?" Ternyata bukan. Maksudnya orang yang lagi ngeliatin apa ya, bukan orang yang lagi ngedengerin doang. Atau juga sih. I wonder apa aku sebaiknya live stream tiap hari ya. Soalnya kalau live stream tiap hari bakal lebih banyak stream-stream gaji kayak hari ini gitu. Untuk apa? Tidak tahu sih. Lagi multitasking sih. Iya, nggak apa-apa. Take your time saja. Kalau mau sambil ngobrol-ngobrol juga boleh. Hmm, jangan burn out yourself gitu. Iya, nggak sih. Kalau aku lagi burn out juga biasanya kan aku menghilang gitu aja. Misalnya kalau aku live stream tiap hari kayak, ya nggak tahu sih, mungkin kayak lebih banyak yang bisa dilakukan atau gimana. Apalagi semester depan kan aku udah nggak ngejar juga. Maksudnya kalau sambil live stream kan bisa sambil ngobrol atau sambil apa gitu. Bisa. Nice. Looks. Texture looks good. Supposedly. Ya kan, yakin aja lah. Anggaplah itu bagus. Hmm. Nah ini sih yang ini juga belum di gambar. Tatarat. Bener you, thank you. Padahal sekarang juga kamu nggak dapat kelasku kan, apa bedanya sih? Kalau mau ngobrol bisa di Discord. Aku mau ke toilet sebentar. Dari tadi pengen bolak-balik. Lalu saya kembali. Musiknya habis. Tutu. Tata. Mari menonton lagi.
We've got some cool stuff. I'm probably going to use something boring like Gaussian blur. So after I tap that, at the top it says here, some thinner lines, and another one here. Tap and hold. I should have turned down my tap and hold so that the part goes a little faster, but that's all right. You get the idea. There we go. So let's go to our adjustments up here. We've got some cool stuff. I'm probably going to use something boring like Gaussian blur. So after I tap that, at the top it says slide to adjust, which means if I slide to the right, it's going to get blurrier. In fact, it got really blurry. Let me slide back down. But you could see around like 2%, it just gets blurry. So it's kind of in the background. And I don't want to go too crazy with this comic, but there's other things we can do here as well, like sharpen, noise, liquefy, clone. In fact, liquefy might be kind of fun. Let me undo the Gaussian blur, and let me turn off the character so it's easier to see this again. And then we'll go to liquefy, and along the bottom we have a whole bunch of options. So we can push, which means I can liquefy like that if I'm pushing in a certain direction. I can twirl. This is the one I was thinking of, where I can start to twirl like that. That actually could be a neat effect. Let's keep twirling for a second, and let's toggle that guy back on. Yeah, I should have thought that through beforehand, but you get the idea. You could do a lot of cool stuff with it. Let's go back to that. Magic wand, liquefy. There's pinch, so you can pinch on the middle. Now that's taking the whole canvas, which is part of the reason it's doing that. There's expand, which takes it and whoop, kind of blows it out. There's crystals, so if I tap on that, it kind of warps out and does some really funky crystallization things. There's edging, which you can mess with the edges a little bit. So all of these things are pretty fun. And down below, there's things like size and pressure. So let's try a twirl with a smaller size here. Oh yeah, that's definitely more along the lines of what I was thinking. Instead of doing the whole canvas, it's just doing a portion of it. Let's twirl that a little bit more. I still don't think this is gonna look right, but yeah, that's not bad. But I think I'm gonna stick with just the Gaussian blur on that one. But I did want to show you what some of these different liquefy effects do, because these are really cool, and it's kind of amazing that they work so quickly on an iPad, that there's not any lag, there's not a lot of slowdown. So let's draw on the last panel. I'm going to create a new layer just for that. And let's just draw some shapes. I'm going to make this big, and we'll draw big shapes. And I'm just going to draw them everywhere. Little dots, big dots, giant dots, small dots. And I'm going to show you why here in a second, because I'm going to do a motion blur type thing. I don't know why I'm drawing them way over there, but there we go. And now we will go up to that adjustment, and I will tap on motion blur. And of course, just like Gaussian blur, I can slide to adjust. And so you see what's happening is they are kind of blurring out in a motion direction. And if I slide to the right, it blurs more.
Oh, pamer hasil gambar di mana ya? Bisa make art channel. Kan kalian moderator. Tetet. Biar nggak masuk suaranya, aku mute or cover.
to the point where I can't really see it anymore. And if I go up, it changes the angle. If I go down, it changes the angle. I want to keep the angle, you know, kind of level. Angle right, it blurring out. We'll go up to that adjustment, and I will tap on motion blur. And of course, just
gini ya maksudnya.
just like Gaussian blur.
Total begini. Kalau di klik hold bisa lebih gede. Nyalain lagi ini juga, terus motion blur, slide to adjust. Lah, mungkin di layar sama. Aduh. Salah layar. Layar yang ini. Lalu sekarang kita pakai motion blur dan slide to adjust. Oh, nice. Nggak nice juga sih. Coba
blur, I can slide to adjust. And so you see what's happening is they're kind of blurring out in a motion direction. And if I slide to the right, it blurs more to the point where I can't really see it anymore. And if I go up, it changes the angle. If I go down, it changes the angle. I want to keep the angle, you know, kind of level, kind of like that. I just want to give the idea that he's there and he's running. And of course, all of those lines are outside of the canvas. So let me toggle this off here really quick.
Dia beda berdasarkan arah aku ngarahinnya ke sebelah mana. Lucu banget. Ke bawah, ke atas, ke sini. Ya gitu. Motion blur. Oh, ada pilihan gini juga. Preview. Apply, undo, apply. Okay.
And let's make sure that they stick to that layer. So I'm going to tap and hold layer 8, put it above the background, because again, I want this to only show up where there's paint below it. So I'm going to tap on it and I'm going to do a clipping mask so the paint only shows up on that layer where there's paint on the layer below it. And there we go. In fact, let's adjust this a little more, because that blur, we kind of lost it. It's almost too hard to see. So let's go back up to our adjustments. Because below all of these things, we have hue and saturation and brightness, color balance, curves, and recolor. All of these are pretty neat. For example, recolor can do just that. You can recolor with the color that you have selected in your color thing. We can go in there and do that. I don't really want to do that. We have hue saturation. You can go in there. You can recolor with the color. All of these saturation and brightness, color balance, curves, and recolor. All of these are pretty neat. For example, recolor can do just that. You can recolor with the color that you have selected in your color thing. We can go in there and do that. I don't really want to do that. We have hue, saturation, and brightness, which is probably what I'm going to play with, where I can change the brightness of it. So I can slide it down a little bit just to make it more noticeable. I can change the hue by adding more saturation to it. I can change the color. I don't want to really do that too much. But that's kind of fun. And then I also want to touch on curves, because curves is another way of doing it where you can just kind of enhance or darken it by playing with a curve and adding points to it. I don't like that at all. I'm going to undo that. But those are our layer adjustments and things like that. So at this point, we have a pretty good comic. It's simple and it gets our point across.
Yeay. Jelek banget. Buatanku aneh. Tetetet. Hai, omega procreate cinta matiku. Recolor nggak ada di situ lagi, Kak. Harus ambil warna dari kanan terus taruh di tempat yang mau kita ganti warnanya. Oh, jadi pen gitu ya. Habis update baru soalnya few months ago. Oh, oke. Okay. Ya, aku sempat dengar sih kalau ada update baru yang katanya udah bisa buka file 3D di sini kan, bisa langsung texturing di dalam gitu. Aku kayak, wah, oke okay, gitu. Ya, actually, ya aku juga baru pakai ini sekarang, jadi aku nggak tahu. Oke, oke, lumayan. Seru kan? Aku penasaran sih. Aku kayak pengen cepet-cepet selesaiin course ini. Karena ini kan course-nya cuma basic doang kan. Jadi abis yang basic, dia mau, bukan dia mau, dia punya beberapa course lain kayak yang bikin buat animasi, buat apa gitu. Aku pengen nyoba-nyobain semua sih. Dan at least kalau aku udah tahu basicnya ya, mungkin aku bisa mengaktifkan kembali Instagram yang sudah lama tidak aku, bukan ini bukan gambarku. Sudah lama tidak kurus. Di bawah-bawah dulu aku suka gambar loh. Ini aku bikinnya pakai Clip Studio Pen. Oke, okay. Ya, ini juga aku gambar lucu. Rata-rata dulu aku gambar pakai Clip Studio Pen sih. Sama 3D model. Kalian pakai kertas. Ini aku gambar muka ciciku. Nggak mirip sih, aslinya lebih cantik. Ya kayak gitu. Oh, animasi seru, bikin GIF kecil taruh di IG story. Iya kan? Aku juga rencananya gitu. Jadi kayak aku pengen tahu basicnya selesai, habis itu mau belajar animasi, habis itu baru aku benar-benar bikin, ya, memberdayakan fungsinya. Ya kata sih. Actually aku beli iPad sebenarnya gak cuma buat gambar, sebenarnya kan buat kerjaan yang lain. Buat apa? Remote komputer di rumah. Pengganti laptop sih sebenarnya tujuannya. Jadi aku kemana-mana nggak perlu bawa laptop. Kayak gitu. Hmm. Oke, lanjut. Ayo kita nonton lagi. Actually aku lapar sih, tapi lagi semangat pengen belajar. Cuman ya sudahlah. Tinggal dikit lagi. Oh, dia bikin procreate update. Oke. Next dulu. Mungkin habis 2 story ini aku makan dulu kali. Tol.
In this section, I want to talk about one of the newer features in Procreate, and a feature that a lot of folks don't even know that is here because it's kind of tucked away and kind of hidden, and I'm talking about the text feature. So, in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to tap on that wrench icon, and then we're going to go to the very first tab, which is the one that says Add. Now we can do a lot of things in here, like insert a file, a photo, whatever, but one of those options there is add text. So I'm gonna tap on that, and it's gonna make me a nice little text box here. And of course, you can see like my little keyboard has jumped up here too, so I'm gonna type in hello, and that's what I'm gonna make this character say. So it looks pretty good. You can type it in, great. And then of course, when you make the keyboard go away, and I can use my arrow tool to, whoops, I meant to move that, but you can use the arrow tool to resize it as well and move it to where you want to go. And
Ntar kenapa warnanya kayak gini? Bisa ganti warna nggak sih? Oh. Terus ini kita oh, dia otomatis bikin layer baru ya. Dikecilin. Terus cara ngecilin tadi dia gimana?
And I can use my arrow tool to, whoops, I meant to move that, but you can use the arrow tool to resize it as well and move it to where you want to go. And there you go. In a nutshell, that's how you add text. But there's a lot of options that you might not see right away. So a couple things about text. It works differently than paint layers. Let's go to our layers for a second and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So as you can see here, when I added that text, what it did is it created its own layer, and that layer has the name of the text that you typed in there. And it looks a little bit different than the other layers, and if we tap on it again, we have some different options. Actually, you only have two separate options. One is the ability to rasterize that text. What that's going to do is it's going to make it just basically the same as all of your other paint on a canvas. It turns it into pixels instead of being a text object. Once you rasterize it, and I'll highlight it here so it's a little easier to see on the screen. Once you rasterize something, you can't go back. It is now pixels. You can't edit it anymore. But if it has this little letter A on it, on the little preview thing, that means it's editable, and we can tap on edit text, and it brings up our little keyboard again. Now, you may have noticed there's a little button in the upper right hand corner of that keyboard that says edit style, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Let's tap on that. Let's show you what is in here. Now, this is where you're going to find all of our font options tucked away, and it's really easy to miss if you don't see that button. So over here on the left hand side, we can go in here and we can choose different fonts. Like we can have that be Helvetica, we could have it be anything that's available on your iPad. And then in the next column over, we can change things like we can make it light, we can make it bold, that sort of thing. Obviously, we can change the size of that text. One thing you're going to notice is if you make it too big, it's going to go outside of your bounding box. But when you're in this mode, you can actually go up to that blue box on top and grab one of those little blue dots and move.
Ini ada cuy. Dia ngomongin apa sih tadi?
Move it over on top, go outside eyes, we can make it bold, that sort of thing. Obviously, we can change the size of that text. One thing you're going to notice is if you make it too big, it's going to go outside of your bounding box. But when you're in this mode, you can actually go up to that blue box on top and grab one of those little blue dots and move it over to change the boundary box of your text. So if you do want it to be bigger and take up the whole screen, we can change that boundary box and then scrub up the size, and we can get away with that. For now, I'm going to move my boundary box back because we just want a nice like cartoon font to stick in here. Maybe I'll shrink you down a little bit. And then of course we have a lot of other options. We have kerning, so we can change the spacing of that text, and we have tracking, leading, baseline. If you're familiar with typography, this sort of thing, or these aren't like hardcore tools, but these are some nice tools to have and give you a little bit of control. And then over on the right hand side, we have things like we can align it to the left, we can align it to the right, we can center it, that sort of thing. We can underline it if we want, we can outline it. So some nice things there. And of course we can always come down here, and this little box here will make it all caps. So just your normal settings. It's nothing fancy. So some nice things there. And of course we can always come down here, and this little box here will make it all caps. So just your normal settings. It's nothing fancy, but if you need to add text to your Procreate document, it's pretty easy, works pretty well. And the last thing I want to touch on a little bit is this idea of importing a font. So you can import fonts into Procreate if you have some on your computer or if you want to find some. So before I tap on that, show you how it works, let's go out onto the internet, let's find some fonts, let's download them onto my iPad, and I'll show you how this whole process works. So I'm going to swipe up from the bottom, might take a swipe or two to bring up my toolbar. You can also close the app and find your internet that way. I'm going to tap on my Safari icon. There we go. Let's get rid of this keyboard. I already have my page open because I knew where I was going. This is Google Fonts. It's fonts.google.com, and I love it because all the fonts are free, and about a third of them are beautiful. The rest aren't, but that's all right. It's a good way to find some fonts that you can use in your designs. So I'm going to go up to the top here. I'm going to tap on categories, and I want the handwritten fonts because I want something that's going to look good on a comic. So I'm going to deselect the other ones, and here we go. I can actually come in here and I can type something, hello, so I can see what the word I want is going to look like, and I can even come in here and scrub up and change the size of it. And then I can come down here and I can say, okay, what kind of handwriting is gonna look really good with what I'm doing here, is gonna kind of fit what I'm doing. For now, I say we just pick one and go. This Patrick hand here, this looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit that little plus button. You may have missed it. It's
Mana Patrick hand? Ya nggak harus sama juga sih, ya deh deh.
Right in the upper right hand corner of that little block. I tap the plus, it turned to a minus, and what you may not have seen is at the bottom of the screen there's this little black bar that says
beda ya. Apa karena aku nggak pakai Safari atau memang karena beda ini?
There's one family selected, and if I tap on that, it's gonna pull it up and it's gonna give me a whole lot of information. But what I want is this arrow right here in the upper right hand corner of that box that has, it's an arrow with a line underneath it. That's the not so universal symbol for download. So I get to tap on that, and it's gonna give me the option to download this zip file, and I'm gonna say yes, go ahead and download it. And then in my upper right, you may have missed it, there's a little arrow tool, and what that does is that shows you all of your downloads for Safari. And this is the easiest way to get to it, is this magnifying glass will actually take you to your Files app where you can see where it saved it. Usually the default folder is the downloads folder. Anyway, here it is, patrickhand.zip. If you're using the most recent version of iOS, which is iPad OS 13 or higher, you're going to be able to just tap on your zip file and it's just going to unzip that for you. I'm going to
masuk ke files. Files, mana sih files? I don't even know where's the files. Gimana bisa di search kan? Files, oh ini udah. Terus ini apa? Ini. Oh, bisa.
Tap through there, and there we go. We have a little description file, and then we have patrickhand-regular.ttf. That's our font file. That's what we're going to install in Procreate. So I'm going to swipe up from the bottom of the screen. I'm going to go back to Procreate, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on that import font button, which is in the kind of upper right hand corner of our font menu there, and there we go. It's going to just take me to my files. I'm going to tap on more locations, and I'm going to go to my downloads folder. Tap on that. There we go. Here's my downloads folder, and I'm going to find Patrick Hand. Here it is. Here's the folder. I'm going to go ahead, and I tapped on that. And now I'm going to tap on patrickhand.regular.ttf. Let's see what happens. Importing. Beautiful. Now over here on my left-hand side, let's see if we can find it. It's Patrick Hand SC. Turns out I have two versions of Patrick Hand. I'm going to tap on that. There we go. Hello. Now I can resize it as I need it, and if I need to, I can always grab that arrow tool, and whoops, I can resize with the arrow tool too, and it won't get fuzzy, which is really nice.
Lucu banget.
But there we go. I'll resize it, put it where I want, and there we go. So in a nutshell, it's gotten really easy to, use type in Procreate, to import fonts in Procreate and do that sort of thing. So might come in handy. We won't be using it anymore in the formal lessons, but it's a good thing to know.
Thank you.
It's time for another activity, and in this activity, I want you to draw a 6-panel comic strip. And you're going to be using all the techniques that we just talked about. We're going to be looking at things like penciling a comic and then inking a comic. I want you to practice drawing straight lines and using different brushes. You can even throw in some of the other things like facial expressions or body language that I talked about a little bit as well. But basically what I want to do here is I want you guys to work on this activity and reinforce some of the tools that you just have been taught and reuse them, and that will help this sink in and familiarize you more with the tools in Procreate. Because the more you use something, the more you're going to get to know it and understand it. Oftentimes, when you're drawing a comic, someone's going to hand you a script. The writer's going to put this together, and they're going to describe panel by panel what's going on. They're going to describe the story. And so that's what I've done here. This is a story without any words. It's all about action and trying to capture that sort of thing. So let's read through this. On panel 1, our main character is in his house, and he hears a scratching sound. So there aren't a lot of details in this story because I want you to use your imagination and fill in the blanks on this comic. Now, your comic doesn't have to be fancy. It could be stick figures, or it could be very simple characters that you've already created. But what I want you to do is put a character in this situation, and you're gonna have to make decisions on this first panel. Like, how are you gonna show that he's actually inside a house? Maybe he or she is reading a newspaper in a chair, or maybe that person is using a vacuum cleaner or working in the kitchen. It's totally up to you. In panel 2, I want a close-up of the character's face. I want to show that this scratching sound that this character heard has actually made them a little bit afraid, a little bit tepid. So that's something that I want to capture in that second panel, and I think the best way to do it is a close-up of a scared-looking character. In panel 3, I want your character to cautiously approach the door where they see that the scratching sound is coming from. Panel 4, you could show that the door is open and our character can see that it's just his dog, and his dog has some kind of scrap of cloth, whether that's in his mouth or next to him, however you want to draw that. You could see that something's there. So the cloth has to be noticeable. You can differentiate this with a brighter color, or you could make it very noticeable, however you want to do it. And in panel 5, I want to do another close-up, and in this one, I want the character to look totally relieved, like, oh, thank goodness, I thought this was going to be bad, I thought there was, a terrible person at the door, but everything's fine. And then in panel 6 is kind of our punchline, which is we pan out a little bit, and we could see that there's actually an angry mailman standing behind this dog, and part of the mailman's pants leg is missing, right? So that's the punchline, like, no, not everything's okay. The mailman is mad at your dog. So that's the comic, and like I said before, this doesn't have to be a masterpiece. The goal here is really just to, use the tools in Procreate to draw straight lines so you can draw your panels, practice penciling, practice inking, and even practice coloring and using layers and that sort of thing. So have at it and enjoy the activity.
Dia ngasih tugas. Oh, dikerjain? Mau sih, tapi nggak sekarang ya. Udah capek. Oke lah, kayaknya udahan dulu deh aku streamnya. Nggak tahu juga mau ngapain lagi. Nah. Mungkin nanti kalau aku ada kegiatan. Bukan kalau ada kegiatan. Kalau tadi aku ngomong mungkin kalau ada waktu aku mau stream lagi, tapi actually sebenarnya waktu itu diada-adain sih. Bukan di nggak tahu mau ngapain. Kayaknya kalau kayak gituin makin lama makin tidak akan tersampaikan. Cuman ya, kayaknya sih begitu. Sudah malam, waktunya makan, waktunya ngebucin, waktunya ini dan itu. Aku nggak tahu sih di antara kalian masih ada yang nonton atau enggak, tapi karena juga yang ini kayaknya rekamannya nggak mau aku upload juga, nggak akan di post ulang, tapi ya sudahlah, buat kalian-kalian yang sudah menemani aku sampai jam segini, terima kasih banyak, terutama Leo. Kamu anteng banget dari tadi masuk ke Discord tuh, thank you. Kan I'm still watching. Ya, thank you. Sudah malam, dan juga kalau masih mau ngerjain ujian atau gimana, silahkan. Jangan kemalaman sih, nanti sakit. Ingat aja, jaga kesehatan. Mungkin dari aku itu aja dulu. Terima kasih. Kapan-kapan kita nonton. Leo, kalau kamu udah dapet AR-nya, kita main bareng lah di stream bareng-bareng. Pasti seru. Ya, begitu pokoknya. Thank you ya. Yang lain juga yang udah nonton. Ini aku ngeliat ada beberapa orang kayaknya cuman lurking doang. Ya, nggak apa-apa sih. Terima kasih loh udah ditemenin aku belajar. Bye-bye. Thank you. Mungkin kapan-kapan, ini kan dia ngasih tugas nih. Either tugasnya aku kerjain sambil stream atau enggak, nanti tugasnya itu bakal aku post di Instagram. Berapa sih? Bentar. Kayak lu siapa? Itu yang begitu. Thank you ya. Terima kasih loh Mas Aridi. Salah. Yang ini dong. Sampai jumpa kapan-kapan. Terima kasih. Bye-bye. Good night. Ya, bye-bye. Bye.